Medieval peasant women lived through things no one talks about. Not in school, not in books, not even in bedtime stories meant to scare kids. Their world was harsh, unforgiving, and full of rules they never agreed to. What was their life really like? Let's start at sunrise, because that's when their day began, whether they were ready or not. Medieval peasant women lived by the sun's schedule, waking before dawn to start fires from barely glowing embers. If you think your morning routine is tough, try making breakfast when you have to literally create fire first. Everything had to be made from scratch in smoky one-room homes without chimneys. Water collection meant multiple daily trips to wells or rivers, carrying heavy wooden buckets back and forth. Some women walked considerable distances just for clean drinking water. Gardens needed daily attention for vegetables like onions, leeks, and cabbage, while animals required feeding and constant supervision. Spinning wool into thread was a never-ending task, along with weaving cloth and mending torn garments. Nothing was thrown away if it could be repaired. Women also made candles and soap from animal fat and dangerous chemicals without protective equipment. These women were running personal manufacturing businesses, except nobody paid them wages and there were no vacation days. Children followed their mothers around all day since there were no televisions or tablets to keep them busy. Seasonal farm work demanded everyone's participation, especially during harvest when women worked alongside men cutting grain and preparing winter food stores. Rest during daylight hours was practically non-existent. From sunrise to sunset, another task always waited. Women might sit briefly while spinning thread, but true relaxation was reserved for after dark when work became impossible without adequate lighting. The physical demands were enormous. Medieval women developed strong muscles from constant manual labor, though this came at the cost of frequent injuries and chronic pain. Their hands were permanently stained from handling dyes and rough materials. They probably went to bed exhausted every night, though at least they didn't have to worry about scrolling through phones keeping them awake. This relentless schedule continued year-round with little variation except for major religious holidays when work was forbidden by church law. These exhausting daily routines shaped every aspect of a woman's existence, but they were only part of a much larger system that controlled how she lived. Love stories had little place in medieval peasant marriages, which operated like business contracts rather than romantic unions. Parents arranged marriages based on land ownership, labor needs, and family alliances. A woman's value was measured in chickens and cooking equipment, which sounds ridiculous until you realize how desperately families needed these resources. The dowry system meant families prepared for daughters' marriages years in advance. Typical dowries included livestock, farming tools, cooking pots, or stored grain. Many women left their childhood homes permanently when they wed, adapting to new routines and unfamiliar neighbors. Legal authority was completely one-sided, with husbands holding power over every aspect of their wives' lives. Women couldn't own property independently, make major decisions, or leave the house for extended periods without permission. Any land or valuable items women brought to marriage became their husband's legal property. Inheritance laws typically bypassed women entirely unless they became widows. Medieval financial planning for women basically involved hoping their husbands lived long enough to provide security, but not so long that they never inherited anything. Separation and divorce were nearly impossible. The Catholic Church forbade divorce except in extremely rare circumstances, and annulments required expensive legal processes beyond most peasants' means. Physical discipline of wives was not only legal, but sometimes expected. Economic dependence reinforced these power imbalances throughout marriage. Since women couldn't own businesses or accumulate wealth independently, they relied entirely on their husbands for financial security. Women basically had to create their own underground support networks, like medieval group therapy, except with more spinning wheels. The emotional reality of these marriages varied significantly. Some couples developed genuine affection over time, while others remained distant throughout their marriages, trapped by systems that prevented separation. Religious teachings reinforced these structures by presenting female submission as divinely ordained. Priests regularly preached about wives' duties to obey their husbands, making challenging marriage inequalities spiritually dangerous. These power structures extended beyond personal relationships into every practical aspect of survival, including the most basic necessity of all: A few months ago, I had no idea what a health ring even was until my fiance got me one, and I have to say, I'm shocked this isn't a widely known and used product. It tracks my stress levels, and what I found out is that some supplements made my stress score spike, while others actually helped bring it down. I adjusted a few things based on that, and honestly, I feel 10 years younger. My wife mainly uses it to track her menstrual cycles, and she is obsessed with her sleep quality score. I noticed they are currently running a limited 69% discount, but I don't know how long it will last. It's currently only $60, and it's clear. This one is the best bang for your buck, with other health rings priced around $350 with less functions. They managed to price it this low because they cut out the middleman like Amazon, Walmart, etc., who drive up the price and take a big margin, ending up with the customer paying 3 to 5 times more. If you are on TV, you can check it out yourself by pausing the video and scanning the QR code with your phone camera or clicking the first link in the description of this video. Medieval peasant kitchens operated like outdoor camping setups with single large hearths where all cooking took place. Smoke constantly filled these spaces since proper chimneys were luxury items, meaning cooks worked in hazy, eye-watering conditions that would send modern health inspectors running. Daily diets centered around barley bread, which was dense, dark, and often gritty from poorly ground grain. Medieval bread was basically the opposite of Wonder Bread. It could probably be used as construction material if the house needed repairs. Wheat was reserved for wealthy families. Pottage formed the backbone of most meals, a thick stew made from whatever grains, vegetables, and scraps were available. This one-pot dish stretched small amounts of food to feed large families, though nutritional value varied dramatically depending on available ingredients. Meat consumption was remarkably rare, appearing only during special occasions. A pig might be slaughtered once yearly, providing salt pork that needed to last months. Peasants treated meat like we treat expensive wine today, saved for special occasions and consumed with great appreciation. Preservation techniques were crucial for winter survival. Women spent autumn frantically preserving surplus food, salting fish, drying fruits, and pickling vegetables. These preserved foods often developed strong, sour flavors that modern palates would find challenging. Water quality posed constant health risks, so most people drank weak ale instead. Medieval people basically lived on beer as their primary beverage, which sounds fun until you realize the ale was so weak it barely qualified as alcoholic. Feeding large families presented enormous challenges, as most households included 6 to 10 people. One-pot meals became essential for efficiently feeding everyone, though this meant limited variety and constant battles over portion sizes. Winter and early spring brought hunger months when stored food ran low and new crops hadn't ripened. Many families survived on thin gruel and foraged roots. Famine struck regularly, often triggered by poor weather or warfare that disrupted farming. The medieval calendar had more food restrictions than modern dietary websites, except breaking the rules could supposedly send you to hell instead of just disappointing your personal trainer. Managing these constant food challenges was difficult enough, but women faced an additional burden that made survival even more precarious. Pregnancy was essentially a 9-month countdown to a potentially life-threatening event, with women facing childbirth armed with little more than hope and herbal remedies. Medieval pregnancy advice probably came from the same reliable sources as modern internet forums, except with fewer emoji and more references to evil spirits. When labor began, women gave birth at home, surrounded by female relatives and local midwives who had learned through experience rather than formal training. These birth attendants lacked understanding of basic hygiene, anatomy, or proper medical procedures. Hand washing wasn't standard practice, and infections were common complications that often proved fatal. Pain relief consisted mainly of herbal teas that provided minimal effectiveness. Women might drink chamomile or raspberry leaf tea, but true anesthesia was centuries away from being discovered. Most women simply endured labor pain through gritting their teeth and praying for quick delivery. The mortality rate for newborns was staggeringly high, with approximately 1 in 3 children dying before reaching age 5. Medieval parents had to develop emotional armor that would seem heartless today, but was actually a survival mechanism for dealing with repeated losses. Mothers frequently lost multiple children throughout their reproductive years. Some women buried 4 or 5 children, while raising only one or two to adulthood. These losses were often attributed to divine will rather than preventable medical conditions. Breastfeeding continued for extended periods, often lasting well over a year because families lacked safe alternatives. This served as natural birth control, spacing pregnancies slightly further apart, though it meant women spent most of their adult years either pregnant or nursing. Medieval maternity leave lasted about as long as it takes to change a diaper, except without disposable diapers or any leave at all. Most women returned to regular household duties within days of giving birth, carrying out physically demanding tasks while their bodies were still healing. Multiple pregnancies were the norm, with most women giving birth to 6 or 8 children over their reproductive years. The physical toll of repeated pregnancies, combined with poor nutrition and constant manual labor, left many women exhausted and prematurely aged. Complications during childbirth often proved fatal for mothers as well as babies. Maternal mortality was so high that many women wrote wills before giving birth, preparing for the possibility they might not survive the experience. Medieval mothers had to master loving their children deeply while simultaneously preparing for the possibility of losing them, which sounds like an impossible emotional tightrope that somehow millions of women managed to walk. Care for sick children relied on herbal remedies and folk treatments, with mixed results at best. Many childhood diseases that are easily treatable today claimed young lives regularly, leaving mothers feeling helpless as they watched their children suffer. Beyond the physical and emotional toll of motherhood, women discovered that survival demanded mastering an entirely different set of skills. Medieval peasant women operated as multi-skilled entrepreneurs without recognition, managing complex economic activities that kept families alive. These women were basically running medieval startups from their homes, except instead of seeking venture capital, they were just trying not to starve. Ale brewing represented one of the most profitable skills women could develop. Women who mastered brewing techniques could sell surplus ale to neighbors, earning precious coins that provided some economic independence. The brewing process required understanding fermentation, timing, ingredient ratios, and quality control that would impress modern craft brewers. Cheese-making transformed perishable milk into valuable, long-lasting protein sources. Women who owned cows or goats could convert excess milk into wheels of cheese that could be stored for months, traded with neighbors, or sold at local markets. The process demanded precise timing, temperature control, and aging techniques that took years to master. Textile production consumed enormous amounts of time while generating household necessities and potential income. Medieval women invented multitasking centuries before anyone coined the term, spinning thread while doing everything else except sleeping. Spinning wool into thread was a constant background activity, with women carrying spindles and working while walking, talking, or supervising other tasks. Weaving cloth required substantial skill and equipment investment, as looms were expensive and took up considerable space in small homes. Women who owned looms could produce cloth for their families while creating surplus fabric for sale or trade. The quality of woven goods determined their market value, so experienced weavers could command higher prices. Local markets provided crucial opportunities for women to sell surplus food, crafts, and services. Medieval women's market stalls were probably like early versions of farmers' markets, except with more bartering and fewer organic certification labels. Market days were often the only times peasant women traveled beyond their neighborhoods, creating social connections and business relationships. Some women developed specialized service roles as midwives, washerwomen, or seamstresses for wealthier families. These positions required advanced skills and often involved traveling to different households, providing rare opportunities to earn wages independently of their husband's agricultural labor. Medieval women were basically their own maintenance departments, handling everything from kitchen repairs to building improvements without YouTube tutorials or hardware store trips. Tool maintenance and home repairs fell largely to women when husbands were busy with fieldwork. Women learned to sharpen knives, repair cooking pots, fix roof leaks, and maintain household equipment that was too expensive to replace frequently. Seasonal farm work required women's full participation during critical periods like planting and harvesting. During harvest time, women worked alongside men cutting grain, binding sheaves, and gathering crops. Their speed and endurance during these crucial weeks often determined whether families would eat well or go hungry during winter months. Animal husbandry was largely managed by women who fed chickens, milked cows, tended pigs, and managed breeding schedules for livestock. Understanding animal behavior, nutrition needs, and health problems was essential for maintaining the protein sources and draft animals that families depended on for survival. Medieval food preservation was like playing a high-stakes game where losing meant your family might starve. Except the rules were passed down through oral tradition, and there was no instruction manual. Food preservation represented a complex set of skills that required timing, chemistry knowledge, and resource management. Women had to judge exactly when fruits were ready for drying, how much salt was needed for preserving meat, and which vegetables would store best through winter. Small-scale manufacturing within households allowed women to produce items like candles, soap, and simple tools that could be sold or traded. These activities required understanding basic chemistry, proper proportions of ingredients, and techniques for creating consistent quality products that would satisfy customers. Medieval women's brains were basically their accounting systems, storing more business information than modern spreadsheets without backup files or cloud storage. Record-keeping for these various economic activities was mostly mental, as few peasant women could read or write. Women had to remember complex information about debts, credits, seasonal schedules, and business relationships without written documentation. Tax obligations indirectly included women's labor contributions, even though taxes were officially paid by male heads of households. The grain, livestock, and crafted goods that women produced formed the foundation for families' tax payments to lords and church authorities. Despite generating substantial economic value through their various activities, women rarely accumulated personal wealth or gained recognition for their contributions. Their labor was viewed as natural extensions of domestic duties rather than skilled economic activities deserving compensation or respect. Economic pressures were constant, but women also had to navigate an entirely different kind of authority that watched their every move. The Catholic Church wielded enormous power over medieval women's lives, extending authority into every aspect of daily existence through moral surveillance and spiritual intimidation. The medieval church basically treated women like ticking time bombs of temptation, ready to destroy civilization if they weren't carefully monitored at all times. The story of Eve's original sin provided religious justification for treating women as morally inferior and spiritually suspect. Priests regularly preached that women were naturally inclined toward evil and needed strict guidance from male authorities to avoid damnation. Confession became a powerful tool for monitoring women's behavior, thoughts, and relationships. Priests required detailed accounts of sins, particularly those related to sexuality, anger, or disobedience. Medieval confession was basically like having a therapist who could sentence you to eternal damnation instead of just charging by the hour. Sexual conduct received particular scrutiny, with detailed rules about when and how married couples could engage in intimate relations. Women were expected to submit to husbands' desires while maintaining spiritual purity, a contradictory requirement that created constant anxiety. Modesty requirements extended beyond clothing to encompass speech, behavior, and facial expressions. Women were instructed to speak quietly, avoid laughter, and maintain downcast eyes in public settings. Medieval women were basically expected to be perpetually cheerful servants who never complained, got angry, or wanted anything for themselves, which sounds like an impossible standard that would drive anyone crazy. Charitable obligations required families to donate food, candles, or labor to the church despite their own desperate poverty. Women often had to sacrifice family resources to meet religious expectations, taking bread from children's mouths to provide offerings. Religious guilt was deliberately cultivated as social control, with women taught to view natural emotions like anger or frustration as sinful impulses requiring confession and penance. Medieval women were supposed to imitate saints who often became holy by avoiding marriage, childbirth, and normal human relationships, which wasn't exactly practical advice for women whose survival depended on those very things. Witchcraft accusations represented the most extreme form of religious persecution, with accusations often targeting women who displayed independence, medical knowledge, or unconventional behavior. The threat of being labeled a witch created constant fear. Convent life offered an alternative to marriage, but this option was primarily available to wealthy women whose families could provide dowries to religious communities. Peasant women rarely had opportunities to join convents. Religious control was overwhelming, but women still found ways to connect with each other and create their own forms of support. Medieval peasant women created intricate social networks that served as lifelines during crises and sources of entertainment during rare relaxation moments. Medieval women basically invented social networking centuries before Facebook, except instead of posting status updates, they shared survival tips while hauling water buckets. Wells served as primary gathering spots where women exchanged news, gossip, and practical advice while collecting water. These daily encounters created opportunities for sharing information about herbal remedies, cooking techniques, and warnings about dangerous neighbors. Medieval market days were probably like modern social media meetups, except with more actual commerce and fewer people taking pictures of their food. Market days provided expanded social opportunities as women traveled beyond their neighborhoods to sell goods and purchase necessities. Spinning circles represented important social institutions, combining necessary textile work with companionship and entertainment. Groups of women gathered to spin thread while sharing stories, songs, and jokes that made tedious work bearable. Medieval gossip was basically the original news network, except instead of professional journalists, they had neighborhood women with excellent memories and strong opinions about everyone's business. However, these networks could become sources of conflict when jealousy, competition, or misunderstandings disrupted relationships. Limited resources meant one family's success often came at another's expense, creating tensions that could explode into serious disputes. Medieval justice was basically like having your worst moments broadcast on social media, except the audience was your entire village, and the consequences lasted for years instead of just going viral for a week. Competition between women could turn ugly when it involved access to limited resources. Feuds over property boundaries, accusations of theft, or disputes about children's behavior could escalate into long-lasting conflicts. Entertainment and humor provided essential relief from grinding stress, with women sharing jokes and stories that helped maintain mental health during difficult periods. Medieval women were basically human libraries, storing and sharing information that would otherwise be lost since most people couldn't read or write. The support women provided each other during childbirth, illness, and family crises created deep emotional bonds that often lasted throughout their lives. Women who had helped each other through difficult times developed loyalties that transcended normal social boundaries. Religious celebrations provided sanctioned opportunities for socializing that brought together women from different social levels. These occasions created temporary breaks from strict social hierarchies. Despite complexities and occasional conflicts within these relationships, most women recognized that maintaining community connections was essential for survival and emotional well-being. These social networks provided crucial support throughout most of a woman's life, though time itself brought its own unique set of challenges. Medieval women who survived childbirth, disease, and endless physical labor faced old age with bodies broken down by decades of harsh work and poor food. Most women lived only 30 to 40 years, making anyone who reached 50 seem incredibly ancient. A medieval woman's body wore out faster than a wooden cart on rocky roads, and there were no mechanics available for repairs. Signs of aging appeared much earlier than today, with women in their 30s often showing gray hair, missing teeth, bent backs, and constant joint pain. The combination of bearing many children, lifting heavy loads, and eating barely enough food took a terrible toll long before what we would consider old age. Elderly women who could no longer handle demanding physical tasks became valuable advisors within their families and villages. Their decades of experience managing households, treating illnesses, and surviving crises made them essential sources of practical wisdom. Medieval retirement planning consisted of hoping your children would remember all the times you fed them and return the favor. Financial security for aging women was practically non-existent, as medieval society offered no retirement plans or government assistance. The role of knowledge keeper became crucial for older women in a world where most people could not read or write. These living libraries stored generations of information about herbal remedies, cooking techniques, weather patterns, and survival strategies. Medieval hospitals were basically the homes of elderly women who had seen enough broken bones and fevers to know what worked and what didn't. The informal healthcare system relied heavily on older women who had accumulated decades of experience treating injuries and illnesses. Death preparation was a constant reality for medieval people who understood that life could end suddenly from accident, disease, or violence. Women often made informal arrangements for their belongings and children while still healthy. Medieval cemeteries were like parking lots where nobody bothered writing down which space belonged to whom. Burial practices for peasant women were simple and practical, with most graves unmarked and quickly forgotten. Legacy for medieval peasant women lived on through skills they taught their daughters and survival knowledge they passed down through families. Their contributions to keeping families alive and communities functioning were enormous, though rarely recognized by male-dominated record keepers. When a medieval grandmother died, it was like losing an entire library, except the books had never been written down, and the librarian took all the information with her. Despite the hardships and early deaths that characterized medieval women's lives, their resilience and determination created the foundation for future generations who would eventually enjoy greater opportunities and longer lifespans. Medieval peasant women lived harsh lives filled with constant struggle, yet their strength, wisdom, and endless contributions kept entire communities alive through the darkest of times.